Ethan Carter had always been a man of quiet curiosity. At 47, he lived in the same small town where his family had roots stretching back over a century. His days were spent poring over dusty books and faded photographs, piecing together fragments of history that others had long forgotten. But there was one story, a deeply personal one, that haunted him more than any other: the tale of his grandfather, Victor Carter. Victor wasn't just another name etched into the family tree. He was a legend, though not the kind that brought pride to every dinner table. People whispered about him in hushed tones, calling him everything from a genius inventor to a madman chasing impossible dreams. Born in the late 1800s, Victor had grown up during a time when science seemed to hold answers to questions no one had yet dared ask. By the age of 30, he was already known for his eccentric inventions, devices that ranged from practical tools to bizarre contraptions no one could quite understand. Some said he built machines that could predict weather patterns months in advance. Others claimed he created gadgets capable of bending light or manipulating sound waves. But none of those stories compared to what happened near the end of his life. When Ethan was a child, his grandmother used to sit him down by the fireplace and tell him tales about Victor. She spoke fondly of her husband, but often trailed off into uneasy silences whenever certain topics arose. "Your grandfather," she'd say, her voice wavering slightly, "was ahead of his time." Then she'd pause, staring into the flames as if trying to decide whether to continue. On rare occasions she'd add cryptically, "Sometimes being ahead of your time isn't a gift, it's a curse." What made Victor's story so mysterious was how it ended. One cold winter night in 1923, Victor vanished without a trace. No one knew where he went or why. Days turned into weeks, and eventually search parties gave up looking. It wasn't until 3 months later that his body was discovered, not far from home inside the mausoleum he had commissioned years earlier. The discovery baffled everyone. Why would someone like Victor, who appeared healthy and full of life, suddenly die? And why did his will insist on such peculiar burial arrangements? The mausoleum itself became part of the mystery. Built with thick stone walls and adorned with intricate carvings, it stood apart from the simpler graves surrounding it. Inscriptions covered its surface, written in languages few people recognized. Scholars debated their meanings for years, but nothing conclusive ever emerged. What struck visitors most, however, was the inscription above the heavy iron door: "Time is both a prison and a key." Those words lingered in Ethan's mind long after he first read them as a boy. They sounded poetic, yes, but also ominous, as if they carried a warning meant only for those brave enough to decipher it. As Ethan grew older, his fascination with Victor deepened. He began collecting scraps of information about his grandfather's life, scouring libraries and archives for anything related to his work. Over time, a clearer picture emerged. Victor hadn't merely dabbled in invention, he'd pursued ideas that bordered on the fantastical. Among his projects were designs for devices that defied conventional physics, machines intended to manipulate time, extend human life, and even peer into alternate realities. Most dismissed these concepts as flights of fancy, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth hidden beneath the speculation. Then came the rumors. Whispers spread among locals about experiments conducted in secret laboratories buried deep within Victor's estate. Some claimed they saw strange lights flickering in the woods at night. Others swore they heard mechanical hums accompanied by unearthly sounds. A handful of townsfolk reported encounters with Victor himself during those final months, describing him as gaunt and feverish, muttering about unlocking eternity and breaking free of chains. These accounts painted a picture of a man consumed by obsession, willing to risk everything, including his own sanity, for the sake of discovery. Despite all this, Ethan remained skeptical. Surely some of these stories were exaggerations born of fear or misunderstanding. Yet there were moments when doubt crept in, like the day he stumbled upon an old photograph tucked away in a forgotten album. In it, Victor stood beside a massive machine, its purpose unknown. The look on his face was unsettling, a mix of triumph and terror, as if he'd glimpsed something both wondrous and horrifying. Ethan stared at that image for hours, wondering what secrets it held. Years passed, and the mausoleum fell into disrepair. Few visited anymore, save for the occasional curious tourist or local historian. But recently, news reached Ethan that the structure was slated for demolition due to structural instability. Hearing this filled him with a sense of urgency. If the mausoleum was destroyed, whatever remained of Victor's legacy might be lost forever. Something inside him, a combination of duty and morbid curiosity, compelled him to act. He decided to open the coffin. It wasn't an easy decision. The thought of disturbing his grandfather's resting place weighed heavily on him. Was he crossing a line by tampering with something sacred? Would he find closure or unleash something better left buried? Questions swirled in his mind, each one more troubling than the last. Still, he couldn't ignore the possibility that answers lay waiting, preserved alongside Victor's remains. With determination hardening his resolve, Ethan prepared for the task ahead. He knew he couldn't do it alone, so he reached out to two people he trusted implicitly. The first was Lila Martinez, a forensic archaeologist and close friend who shared his passion for uncovering hidden truths. Practical and level-headed, Lila served as the perfect counterbalance to Ethan's more impulsive tendencies. The second was Father Gregory, the town priest, whose wisdom and calm demeanor provided reassurance in uncertain times. Both agreed to join him, though neither hid their reservations about the endeavor. On the eve of the planned excursion, Ethan found himself restless. Sleep eluded him as vivid images of Victor played through his mind. What would he find inside the coffin? Bones, dust, or something else entirely? As dawn approached, he realized the journey ahead would change him forever. Whatever awaited him in that mausoleum, it wouldn't just answer questions, it would force him to confront the very nature of life, death, and the boundaries between them. Little did Ethan know, opening the coffin would mark the beginning of an adventure unlike anything he'd ever imagined. The night was unusually cold, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. Ethan stood at the edge of the cemetery, staring up at the looming silhouette of the mausoleum against the dim glow of the moon. It felt surreal, almost like stepping into one of the old ghost stories his grandmother used to tell him as a child. But this wasn't fiction. It was real life, and he was about to do something most people would consider unthinkable. He tightened his grip on the flashlight in his hand, its beam cutting through the darkness as if trying to reassure him that everything would be all right. Beside him, Lila adjusted her backpack, stuffed with tools and equipment they might need for the task ahead. She glanced at Ethan, her expression unreadable but tinged with concern. "You sure about this?" she asked softly, breaking the silence that hung between them like a thick fog. Her voice carried a note of skepticism, though Ethan knew it came from a place of genuine care rather than outright disapproval. "I have to be," Ethan replied, his tone firm despite the unease gnawing at the edges of his resolve. "If we don't do this now, whatever's inside could be lost forever." Father Gregory, standing slightly apart from the two, crossed himself and murmured a quiet prayer under his breath. His presence added an air of solemnity to the moment, reminding Ethan of the gravity of what they were about to undertake. The priest had been hesitant when Ethan first approached him, citing moral and spiritual concerns about disturbing the dead. Yet here he was, lantern in hand, ready to bear witness to whatever awaited them within those ancient stone walls. "Let's just hope we're not making a mistake," Father Gregory said finally, his voice low but steady. "Some doors are better left closed." Ignoring the weight of his words, Ethan led the way toward the mausoleum. The path was uneven, littered with fallen leaves and patches of frost that crunched beneath their boots. As they drew closer, the structure loomed larger, its carvings casting eerie shadows in the flickering light of their lanterns. Despite having seen it countless times before, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding wash over him. There was something different about tonight, something electric in the air, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Reaching the heavy iron door, Ethan hesitated for a brief moment before pulling out a set of keys. They weren't ordinary keys. These had been passed down through generations and trusted to him by his grandmother before she passed away. Inserting the largest key into the lock, he turned it slowly, feeling resistance give way with a loud click. The sound echoed through, the stillness sending a shiver down his spine. Pushing the door open revealed a dark, musty interior that seemed to swallow the light whole. Inside, the air was thick and stale, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and decay. Cobwebs clung to every surface, their delicate threads shimmering faintly in the lantern glow. The space was smaller than Ethan remembered, dominated by the massive stone coffin resting in the center of the room. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings similar to those outside, though they appeared sharper somehow, as if time itself had spared them from erosion. "This is it," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his own heart. He stepped forward cautiously, followed closely by Lila and Father Gregory. Each step echoed loudly, amplifying the tension in the room. Lila knelt beside the coffin, running her fingers lightly over the carvings. "These symbols, I've never seen anything quite like them," she murmured, her brow furrowing in concentration. "They look like some kind of cipher, maybe instructions or warnings." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, opening the coffin. With Lila's help, he located the seam where the lid met the base and began prying it loose using crowbars they'd brought along. The process was slow and laborious, requiring all their strength to budge the stubborn stone. Every creak and groan sent fresh waves of apprehension coursing through Ethan's veins. But he refused to stop. This was too important. Finally, after what felt like hours, the lid shifted enough for them to lift it completely. Setting it aside carefully, they peered into the coffin and froze. Instead of skeletal remains or dust, they found a body wrapped tightly in metallic fabric that gleamed faintly even in the dim light. The material looked otherworldly, unlike anything any of them had ever encountered. It clung to the figure beneath like liquid silver, preserving every contour while obscuring details. Most shocking of all, there was no sign of decomposition. Whoever, or whatever lay inside appeared perfectly intact, as though death had occurred mere days ago instead of a century. For several moments, no one spoke. The sight was both mesmerizing and unsettling, defying logic and reason. Then Lila broke the silence, her voice trembling slightly. This shouldn't be possible." Father Gregory moved closer, raising his lantern higher to get a better look. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. "It's unnatural," he muttered, shaking his head. "No human should remain preserved like this, not without divine intervention." Ethan, however, couldn't tear his eyes away. Something about the scene resonated deep within him, stirring emotions he couldn't quite name. Was it awe, fear, or perhaps a mix of both? Whatever it was, it compelled him to reach out, his fingers brushing against the metallic cloth. Instantly, he felt a strange sensation, a subtle vibration that seemed to hum beneath his touch. "What is this?" he breathed, half to himself and half to the others. Lila reached out tentatively, mimicking his gesture. Her reaction mirrored his own. "It feels alive," she said, her voice filled with wonder and unease. "Like it's generating energy or something." Father Gregory stepped back abruptly, clutching his cross tightly. "We shouldn't interfere further," he warned, his tone urgent. "Whatever force is at work here, it's beyond our understanding. We risk angering powers we can't control." But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. Beneath the metallic wrapping, he noticed something else, a leather-bound journal clutched in the figure's hands. Carefully, he pried it free, his heart racing as he examined the worn cover. Flipping it open revealed pages filled with sketches, diagrams, and handwritten notes scrawled in ink that hadn't faded with time. Each entry hinted at experiments and discoveries so advanced they bordered on science fiction. One passage caught his attention immediately. "If you're reading this, then my journey has either succeeded or ended in ruin. Trust nothing you see. Reality bends where truth falters. The words sent a chill down Ethan's spine, yet they only fueled his determination. Whatever secrets his grandfather had taken to the grave, they were now within reach, and he intended to uncover them, all of them. Ethan sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor of the mausoleum, the leather-bound journal resting in his lap. His hands trembled slightly as he turned its pages, each one revealing more of Victor's cryptic thoughts and sketches. The air around them seemed heavier now, charged with an energy that none of them could explain. Lila hovered nearby, her sharp eyes scanning the diagrams while Father Gregory stood a few feet away, clutching his lantern like a lifeline. The priest's face was pale, his lips moving silently as if reciting another prayer. The journal wasn't just a collection of notes. It was a window into Victor's mind, a brilliant but deeply troubled man who had walked the fine line between genius and madness. Ethan felt both awe and unease as he pieced together fragments of his grandfather's final project. Early entries described experiments aimed at manipulating time itself, devices designed to slow it down, speed it up, or even freeze it entirely. Victor referred to these inventions as temporal anchors, tools meant to preserve moments indefinitely. At first glance, they sounded like the musings of a dreamer, but the precision of his calculations suggested otherwise. One page caught Ethan's attention, a detailed blueprint for what appeared to be a machine composed of gears, crystals, and wires arranged in intricate patterns. Beneath the drawing, Victor wrote, "The anchor must resonate at exactly 432 Hz to stabilize the temporal field. Any deviation risks collapse." Ethan frowned, trying to make sense of the technical jargon. He glanced at Lila, whose forehead creased as she studied the same passage. "What does this mean?" he asked, pointing to the frequency notation. "Do you think this is real? Could something like this actually work?" Lila hesitated before answering, her voice measured but tinged with skepticism. "If we're talking about theoretical physics, then yeah, there are hypotheses about frequencies affecting matter and energy fields. But building a machine like this, manipulating time itself, that's way beyond anything modern science has achieved, or even imagined." Her words didn't deter Ethan. If anything, they only deepened his fascination. He flipped through more pages, uncovering references to materials Victor claimed were essential for constructing the anchor. Some were recognizable, copper, quartz, but others bore names Ethan had never heard before: Etherium, chronoresin, and something simply labeled the core. Each material came with meticulous instructions on how to process and assemble them, written in a mix of scientific terminology and poetic metaphor. As he delved deeper, the tone of the entries shifted. What started as confident descriptions of progress gave way to increasingly frantic scribbles. Victor began documenting failures, experiments gone wrong, machines that overheated or malfunctioned catastrophically. One entry described a temporal ripple that caused clocks within a 10-mile radius to stop simultaneously. Another recounted an incident where objects in his lab vanished momentarily, only to reappear hours later covered in frost. The incidents grew stranger and more dangerous, culminating in a chilling warning scrawled across 2 pages. "Reality is fragile. Tampering with its threads invites chaos. I fear I have awakened something ancient, something not meant to be disturbed." Ethan paused, his breath catching in his throat. He looked up at Lila and Father Gregory, who were watching him intently. "This isn't just about preserving life or freezing time," he said slowly. He was trying to unlock something bigger, something he couldn't control. Father Gregory stepped forward, his expression grave. "And look where it led him," he said, gesturing toward the coffin. "Whatever he unleashed, it consumed him. Are you sure you want to follow in his footsteps?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he returned to the journal, flipping to the last few pages. These were different from the rest, written hastily, almost feverishly. Victor described activating the anchor for the first time, detailing the blinding light and deafening roar that accompanied its activation. Then came the most unsettling part. "I am no longer certain whether I exist in the past, present, or future. Time folds upon itself, creating loops I cannot escape. My body feels foreign, my thoughts fragmented. Am I alive, dead, both, neither? The final entry ended abruptly, mid-sentence. If you've found me, know this. The anchor is still active. It binds me here, tethering my essence to, that was all. No conclusion, no resolution, just silence, frozen in ink. Ethan closed the journal gently, his mind racing. The implications were staggering. If Victor's notes were accurate, and given the condition of the body in the coffin they likely were, then the anchor hadn't just failed. It had succeeded in ways no one could have predicted, trapping Victor in some kind of limbo between life and death. And judging by the faint vibrations emanating from the coffin, it was still operational after all these years. We need to figure out how this thing works, Ethan said finally, breaking the tense silence. If we can understand it, maybe we can shut it off or at least find out what happened to him. Lila shook her head, clearly uneasy. You realize how risky that is, right? We're dealing with forces we don't fully comprehend. One wrong move, and we could end up like him. I agree, Father Gregory interjected, his voice firm. This isn't a game, Ethan. You're playing with fire. Or worse. There are boundaries humans aren't meant to cross. But Ethan wasn't listening. For the first time in his life, he felt connected to his grandfather, not as a distant figure shrouded in mystery, but as a man driven by passion and ambition. He understood now why Victor had pursued such dangerous experiments, even knowing the risks. It wasn't just about discovery. It was about leaving a legacy, about pushing humanity forward no matter the cost. We can't leave it like this, Ethan insisted, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. If we walk away, we'll never know the truth. And if something goes wrong, well, at least we tried. Reluctantly, Lila knelt beside him again, pulling out her phone to snap photos of the journal's pages. Fine, she said with a sigh. But we document everything, every step, every detail. If things go south, we need to know exactly what triggered it. Father Gregory remained silent, though his disapproval was evident. He crossed himself once more and took a step back, keeping his distance from the coffin. God help us all, he murmured under his breath. With renewed focus, Ethan and Lila began examining the metallic cloth wrapped around Victor's body. It shimmered faintly in the lantern light, its surface smooth yet oddly textured, like liquid metal frozen in place. As they inspected it closer, they noticed tiny etchings along the edges, symbols similar to those carved into the walls of the mausoleum. Lila traced one with her finger, frowning. These markings, they're not random. They form a pattern, almost like circuitry. She pulled out a small magnifying glass from her toolkit and leaned in further. It's possible this fabric is part of the anchor itself, a component designed to interact with whatever mechanism is inside the coffin. Ethan nodded, his pulse quickening. So the anchor isn't just a standalone device. It's integrated into everything. The coffin, the fabric, maybe even the mausoleum itself. Before they could explore further, a low hum filled the room, growing louder with each passing second. The vibrations beneath their feet intensified, causing dust to fall from the ceiling. Lila stumbled backward, her eyes wide with alarm. What's happening? Ethan scrambled to his feet, clutching the journal tightly. I don't know, but I think we just activated something. The metallic cloth began to shimmer violently, pulsating with light that cast eerie shadows across the walls. Victor's body twitched ever so slightly, as if responding to the surge of energy. Father Gregory backed toward the door, his lantern shaking in his hand. We need to get out of here, he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. But Ethan refused to budge. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. Whatever secrets lay hidden in the coffin were now stirring, reaching out to him across the decades. He couldn't turn away now, no matter how terrifying it became. Stay calm, he urged, though his own heart was pounding wildly. We need to see this through. The hum reached a crescendo, and for a brief moment, the entire mausoleum seemed to vibrate in unison. Then, as suddenly as it began, The noise ceased. The light faded, leaving them in near total darkness, save for the flickering glow of their lanterns. In the heavy silence that followed, Ethan realized something profound. They weren't alone anymore. The silence that followed the sudden cessation of the hum was deafening. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was oppressive, like the world itself had paused to hold its breath. Ethan stood frozen, his grip tightening on the journal as he scanned the room. Shadows danced along the walls cast by the flickering lanterns, but there was something unnatural about their movements. They seemed alive, shifting and writhing in ways that defied logic. Lila crouched low, her hands gripping her toolkit like a lifeline, while Father Gregory remained near the door, muttering prayers under his breath. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, almost imperceptible, but they grew louder with each passing second. The voices overlapped, speaking in languages none of them recognized. Some sounded guttural and harsh, others melodic and hauntingly beautiful. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the whispers weren't coming from outside the mausoleum. They were emanating from within the coffin itself. What is that?" Lila stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She clutched her magnifying glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. Ethan didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the metallic cloth wrapped around Victor's body. It shimmered faintly again, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. Each pulse sent ripples through the fabric, as if it were responding to some unseen force. He took a cautious step closer despite every instinct screaming at him to back away. "It's him," Ethan said finally, his voice trembling. "It's grandfather." Father Gregory stepped forward abruptly, his face pale but resolute. "This is madness," he exclaimed, his voice rising. "You're not hearing your grandfather. You're hearing echoes of whatever power he unleashed. This isn't human anymore." But Ethan couldn't tear his gaze away from the coffin. The whispers grew clearer now, forming words that pierced through the haze of fear clouding his mind. One phrase repeated over and over. "Release me." "Did you hear that?" Ethan asked, turning to Lila and Father Gregory. "He's asking us to let him go." Lila shook her head vehemently, panic creeping into her expression. "No, Ethan, that's not him. Whatever's inside that coffin isn't your grandfather, it's something else wearing his skin. You can't trust it." Before Ethan could respond, the metallic cloth began to unravel. Slowly at first, then faster, it peeled away from Victor's body, pooling onto the floor like molten silver. Beneath it lay the perfectly preserved figure of a man who looked eerily lifelike. His eyes were closed, his features serene, but there was an otherworldly quality to his appearance. A faint glow emanating from his skin, as though light itself coursed beneath it. And then, without warning, his eyes snapped open. The group gasped, in unison. Victor's irises glowed a soft, ethereal blue, casting an eerie light across the room. When he spoke, his voice carried an unnatural resonance, layered with tones that seemed to echo from far away. "Ethan," he said, his lips barely moving. "You've come." Ethan staggered backward, overwhelmed by the surreal sight before him. This was his grandfather, the man whose legacy had haunted him for years, but also someone more. Someone altered, something beyond comprehension. "Grandfather?" Ethan managed to choke out, his voice shaking. "Is that really you?" Victor, or what remained of him, nodded slowly. "In part," he replied cryptically. "I am both myself and something greater. The anchor bound me here, tethering my essence to this plane. I exist neither fully alive nor fully dead." Lila moved closer to Ethan, her hand brushing against his arm as if seeking reassurance. "What do you mean, something greater?" she demanded, her tone sharp despite the fear evident in her eyes. "What happened to you?" Victor's glowing gaze shifted to her, and for a moment the air around them seemed to grow colder. "I sought to unlock eternity," he explained, his voice calm but tinged with sorrow. "To preserve knowledge, life, time itself. But I underestimated the forces I awakened. The anchor did not freeze time, it fractured it. Reality bent to accommodate my presence, creating loops and distortions that ripple outward even now. As if to prove his point, the shadows in the room began to twist violently, forming shapes that resembled faces contorted in anguish. The lanterns flickered wildly, threatening to extinguish altogether. Father Gregory raised his cross, shouting, "Enough! Cease this torment!" But Victor ignored him, focusing instead on Ethan. "My boy," he continued, his tone softer now, almost pleading, "you must understand. I meant no harm. I only wanted to ensure humanity's survival, to safeguard its greatest achievements. But in doing so, I became trapped between worlds. My body serves as a conduit, maintaining the anchor's stability. Without it, chaos would consume everything." Ethan struggled to process what he was hearing. His grandfather's words painted a picture of a man consumed by ambition, willing to sacrifice himself and perhaps the world for the sake of discovery. Yet there was a vulnerability in his demeanor, a hint of regret that made Ethan question whether Victor truly understood the consequences of his actions. "So what happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice steadier than he expected. "If we shut off the anchor, will you die or disappear?" Victor hesitated, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. "Perhaps," he admitted, "or perhaps I will finally be free. But know this, deactivating the anchor carries risks. The fractures I created may collapse entirely, unraveling the fabric of reality as you know it." Lila interjected, her voice urgent. "We can't just gamble with the fate of the world based on guesswork. There has to be another way, a way to contain this without destroying everything." Victor tilted his head, studying her with an unreadable expression. "Containment is impossible," he said simply. "The anchor is too deeply embedded in the flow of time. To remove it would require dismantling the very foundation upon which existence rests." Father Gregory stepped forward, his lantern held high. "Then it stays," he declared firmly. "Whatever horrors you've unleashed, they remain sealed here. We cannot play God, meddling with forces meant to remain untouched." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of Victor's revelation hung heavy in the air, pressing down on them like a physical force. Ethan glanced at the journal still clutched. In his hands, its pages filled with secrets that now felt less like discoveries and more like curses. He thought about his grandmother's warnings, her whispered tales of obsession and tragedy. Had she known all along what Victor had become? Finally, Ethan met his grandfather's gaze. "Tell me how to shut it off," he said quietly, his resolve hardening. "If there's even a chance we can fix this, to undo the damage, you owe us that much." Victor studied him for a long moment, his glowing eyes searching Ethan's face as if trying to discern his intentions. Then, with a slow nod, he spoke. "Very well," he said. "But beware. Once begun, the process cannot be undone. You must decide. Is preserving the present worth risking the future?" With those words, Victor extended a hand toward the coffin. A small compartment slid open, revealing a crystalline core pulsing with the same blue light as his eyes. "The anchor's heart," he explained. "Destroy it and the cycle ends, but act swiftly, for time waits for no one." Ethan reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of the crystal. As soon as he touched it, visions flooded his mind. Flashes of alternate realities, timelines branching and collapsing, lives lived and erased in an instant. He staggered backward, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what he was seeing. Lila grabbed his arm, steadying him. "Ethan, are you okay?" she asked, concern etched into her features. "I saw," he began, struggling to find the right words. "I saw everything, all the possibilities, all the outcomes. If we don't stop this, it'll keep spreading. Reality itself will unravel." Father Gregory crossed himself again, his voice trembling. "May God have mercy on our souls." Victor watched them silently, his expression unreadable. For the first time since awakening, he looked peaceful, as if he'd accepted his fate. "The choice is yours," he said softly. "But remember, some truths are better left buried." And with that, The room fell silent once more, leaving Ethan to grapple with the decision that would change everything. Ethan stood frozen, his hand hovering over the crystalline core nestled within the coffin. The weight of Victor's words pressed down on him like an invisible force, making it hard to breathe. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to step back and leave things as they were. But deep inside, he knew that wasn't an option. The visions he'd seen when touching the crystal had been overwhelming, chaotic glimpses of fractured realities, where time bent and broke in horrifying ways. Lives flickered in and out of existence like candle flames caught in a storm. Entire cities dissolved into nothingness, their inhabitants vanishing without a trace. If the anchor continued to operate unchecked, those fragmented timelines would bleed into the present, consuming everything. Lila was pacing now, her hands clenched into fists as she muttered under her breath. "This is insane," she said finally, stopping abruptly to face Ethan. "We're talking about destroying something we barely understand. What if shutting it off makes things worse? What if doing nothing guarantees disaster?" Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp but steady. He held up the journal, its worn pages fluttering slightly in the cold air. "Look at this. Look at what Grandfather wrote. He knew the risks, he even warned us himself. If we don't act, the fractures will keep spreading until there's nothing left." Father Gregory moved closer to the coffin, his lantern casting long shadows across the stone floor. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. "And yet, you propose to destroy the very thing holding these fractures together," he said gravely. "If what your grandfather says is true, dismantling the anchor could collapse reality entirely. Are you prepared for that?" Ethan hesitated, glancing at the glowing core. It pulsed rhythmically, almost hypnotically, as if daring him to make the final move. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he being reckless? Arrogant even? Who was he to decide the fate of the world based on scraps of information scribbled in a century-old notebook? But then he thought about Victor, the man who had once been his grandfather but now existed as something else entirely, something trapped between life and death, tethered to a machine that warped the natural order of existence. Ethan remembered the regret in Victor's glowing eyes, the sorrow in his voice when he spoke of his mistakes. Whatever Victor had become, he didn't want this burden anymore. He wanted release and perhaps redemption. "We can't run from this," Ethan said firmly, turning to face Lila and Father Gregory. "If we walk away, we're condemning the future to chaos. At least this way, we have a chance, a slim one, maybe, but still a chance to fix what's broken." Lila sighed heavily, running a hand through her hair. "All right," she conceded reluctantly, "but let's do this carefully. We need to follow the instructions in the journal exactly. One wrong move and we're all dead," Father Gregory finished grimly. "Or worse." Ignoring the priest's ominous tone, Ethan flipped open the journal to the section detailing the deactivation process. The instructions were complex, written in Victor's precise handwriting but interspersed with cryptic warnings. "Do not hesitate. Hesitation invites instability." Another note read, "The core must be removed counterclockwise during the third pulse cycle." "What does that mean?" Lila asked, peering over Ethan's shoulder. "Third pulse cycle? Is that timing related?" Ethan nodded slowly. "I think so. The core pulses in cycles. It brightens and dims 3 times before repeating. We need to remove it during the third dim phase." As if on cue, the core began to glow brighter, its light intensifying until it filled the room. Then, just as suddenly, it dimmed, plunging them into near darkness before flaring up again. Each cycle lasted only a few seconds, creating a rhythmic pattern that grew more pronounced with each repetition. "Okay," Ethan said, taking a deep breath. "On the next cycle, I'll pull it out during the third dim phase. Everyone stay alert. If anything goes wrong, get out of here immediately." Father Gregory crossed himself again, his voice trembling as he whispered another prayer. Lila positioned herself near the door, ready to flee if necessary. The tension in the room was palpable, pressing down on them like a physical weight. When the next cycle began, Ethan leaned forward, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of the core. The first pulse passed quickly, followed by the second. As the third dim phase approached, he braced himself, gripping the crystal tightly. Time seemed to slow as the light faded, leaving the mausoleum bathed in shadow. With a swift motion, Ethan twisted the core counterclockwise and yanked it free. The reaction was instantaneous. A deafening roar filled the room, shaking the walls and sending shock waves rippling outward. The metallic cloth pooled on the floor began to disintegrate, dissolving into shimmering particles that floated upward like embers in a fire. Victor's body convulsed violently, his glowing eyes widening as a look of both pain and relief washed over his face. "It's done," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "Thank you." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them buckled, cracks spiderwebbing across the stone floor. Objects in the room, tools, lanterns, even chunks of the ceiling began to levitate, spinning erratically as if caught in an invisible vortex. Shadows twisted and writhed, forming grotesque shapes that lunged toward them before dissipating into nothingness. "Get out!" Father Gregory shouted, grabbing Ethan by the arm and dragging him toward the exit. Lila was already halfway out the door, shouting for them to hurry. Ethan stumbled after them, clutching the journal and the glowing core tightly. Behind him, Victor's voice echoed faintly, growing softer with each passing second. "Remember, carry the torch." The last thing Ethan saw before fleeing the collapsing mausoleum was Victor's body dissolving into light, his form fading into the ether as the fractures in reality began to heal themselves. Outside, the trio collapsed onto the frost-covered grass, gasping for air as the structure behind them crumbled inward with a thunderous crash. Dust and debris billowed into the night sky, blotting out the stars. For several moments, no one spoke. They simply sat there, staring at the ruins, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, Lila broke the silence. Did we stop it?" she asked, her voice shaky. Ethan glanced down at the core in his hands. Its glow had dimmed significantly, pulsing weakly as if struggling to maintain its power. Slowly, he set it aside, watching as it flickered one last time before going dark. "I think so," he said quietly. He said, "But I don't think we'll ever know for sure." Father Gregory crossed himself once more, his expression somber. "God willing, we've averted catastrophe. But tread carefully, my son. Some doors should remain closed." Ethan nodded absently, his mind racing. He felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, grief, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Victor's final words echoed in his thoughts. Carry the torch. What did that mean? Was he supposed to continue his grandfather's work, or learn from his mistakes and ensure such dangers were never unleashed again? As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan made a silent vow. Whatever the future held, he would honor Victor's legacy, not by pursuing forbidden knowledge, but by protecting the fragile balance of the world he had fought so hard to save. The days following the collapse of the mausoleum passed in a blur for Ethan. He returned to his quiet life, but nothing felt the same anymore. The weight of what he had done and what he had witnessed lingered like a shadow over every waking moment. Victor's final words echoed in his mind constantly. Carry the torch. At first, Ethan wasn't sure what that meant. Was it a call to continue exploring the mysteries of time and existence? Or was it something simpler? A reminder to preserve knowledge responsibly, without succumbing to the hubris that had consumed his grandfather? Lila visited him often during those early days, her sharp eyes always searching his face for signs of distress. She brought coffee and pastries, sitting across from him at his cluttered kitchen table while they talked about everything and nothing. Sometimes she tried to steer the conversation toward the events in the mausoleum, but Ethan avoided delving too deeply into it. It wasn't that he didn't trust her. It was more that he didn't fully understand it himself. "You've changed," Lila said one afternoon, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. "You seem heavier, like you're carrying something you don't know how to put down." Ethan smiled faintly, tracing the rim of his mug with his finger. "Maybe I am," he admitted. Everything I believed about my family, about history itself, it's all different now. How do you move forward after something like that? Lila leaned forward, her expression softening. You don't have to figure it out all at once. Just take it one step at a time. And remember, you saved us. Whatever else happened in there, you stopped something catastrophic. Her words offered some comfort, but they couldn't erase the lingering questions gnawing at him. What exactly had they stopped? Had they truly repaired the fractures in reality, or merely delayed the inevitable? And what about Victor? Was he finally at peace, or had his essence been scattered across timelines forever lost? Father Gregory also checked in periodically, though his visits were less frequent and far more solemn. He often brought books on theology and philosophy, leaving them on Ethan's doorstep with handwritten notes tucked inside. One note read simply, "Faith is trusting even when answers elude us." Another said, "Some truths are not ours to uncover." Ethan appreciated the gesture, though he found little solace in the priest's cryptic musings. Still, he couldn't deny the impact of their shared experience. Father Gregory's presence reminded him that not all questions needed definitive answers, that sometimes faith in the unknown was enough. Over time, Ethan began to see the priest's wisdom not as a dismissal of curiosity, but as a gentle guidepost, steering him away from obsession. As weeks turned into months, Ethan threw himself into his work with renewed purpose. He dedicated hours each day to cataloging Victor's journal, transcribing its entries into digital formats and cross-referencing them with historical records. Though many of the notes remained indecipherable, others hinted at groundbreaking ideas that could reshape modern science, if approached cautiously. Rather than hoarding this knowledge, Ethan decided to share it selectively with trusted colleagues, ensuring that Victor's discoveries would be studied responsibly rather than exploited recklessly. One evening, while poring over a particularly complex diagram, Ethan stumbled upon a passage he hadn't noticed before. Hidden among dense calculations and technical jargon was a brief reflection written in Victor's familiar handwriting. To seek eternity is to court oblivion. True immortality lies not in preserving oneself, but in leaving behind a legacy worth remembering. Let my failures serve as warnings and my successes inspire caution. Carry the torch, not to illuminate the darkness, but to guide others safely through it. Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as he read the words aloud to himself. For the first time, he understood what Victor had meant. The torch wasn't a literal pursuit of forbidden knowledge. It was a responsibility to learn, to teach, and to protect. His grandfather hadn't wanted him to repeat his mistakes. He'd wanted him to honor the lessons learned from them. Inspired by this revelation, Ethan began organizing lectures and workshops at local universities, sharing stories of Victor's brilliance alongside cautionary tales of his downfall. He spoke passionately about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of humility in the face of mystery. To his surprise, his talks resonated deeply with students and academics alike, sparking discussions about ethics, innovation, and the limits of human understanding. Slowly but surely, Ethan found a new sense of balance. He still spent countless hours researching and writing, but now his focus was on preservation rather than discovery. Instead of trying to unlock new secrets, he worked to safeguard the ones already unearthed, ensuring they wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. The townsfolk, meanwhile, seemed largely unaware of the drama that had unfolded within the crumbling mausoleum. When asked about its destruction, Ethan simply explained that structural instability had caused it to collapse naturally. Few questioned his story, content to leave the past buried where it belonged. But for Ethan, the memory of that night would never fade. In moments of quiet reflection, he often found himself staring at the photograph of Victor standing beside the mysterious machine. The image no longer filled him with dread or confusion. It reminded him of the delicate line between genius and madness, ambition and restraint. Most importantly, it reminded him of the man beneath the legend, a visionary who had dared to dream big only to stumble under the weight of his own aspirations. Years later, as Ethan stood on the edge of the cemetery overlooking the site where the mausoleum once stood, He felt a profound sense of closure. The grass had grown thick and green over the rubble, erasing any trace of the structure that had once dominated the landscape. A small plaque marked the spot, bearing Victor's name and a simple inscription: "A seeker of truth whose light continues to guide us." Ethan smiled faintly, running his fingers over the cool metal surface of the plaque. He knew the world would never fully understand the sacrifices made to protect it, or the fragile beauty of the balance they had restored. But that was okay. Some stories weren't meant to be told in full. Their power lay in the silence between the lines. Turning away from the sight, Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the crisp autumn air fill his lungs. He carried the torch now, not as a burden, but as a beacon. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, he walked it with gratitude for the lessons of the past, the fragility of the present, and the boundless possibilities of the future.